Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for joining today. Um, as Maddie introduced, my name is Ramon Lopez. I'm a solutions architect, specialist on the QuickSight product, and I've been with AWS around 2 years. I've been in the software space for around 20 years, 10 years in the BI space, and I love working with QuickSight, love working with customers in QuickSight, and happy to talk to you today about some connectivity features that we have in QuickSight and AWS that allow you to leverage S3, Athena, and Redshift connectivity with additional governance. And that's the main topic of the conversation. So a little bit about our agenda. So we're going to start off by talking about kind of high-level data connectivity in QuickSight. What do we do? What can we do? And how do we do it? We're going to talk about some the run as role capability, which is the star of today's session. We're going to understand what run as role means and how it can help us. Next, we'll talk about an example of using this run as role feature in the enterprise. And then we'll jump into looking at the three data sources, S3, Athena, and Redshift in detail. We'll look at the setup configuration for each one, and then we'll do a quick demonstration of how we're connecting to these data sources. So we'll jump right in. We've got a lot of content to cover in 26 minutes. So first, at a high level, Amazon QuickSight, I hope and assume that many of you already know what a QuickSight is, but if you don't, quick little tidbits here. So first of all, it's a BI solution in AWS and Amazon, and we call it Unified BI Service at Hyperscale, BI being business intelligence. And what we aim to do is to provide you all the capabilities needed to run all your reporting, all your analytics, all your business intelligence in one platform. That means interactive dashboarding. That means distributed PDF, CSVs, Excels, via emails, that type of traditional paginated reporting distribution. We're talking about natural language querying, Gen BI, Gen AI, being able to ask questions of your data and receive back one or multiple visualizations explaining your data. Talk about embedded analytics. So being able to take dashboards, take reports, and integrate them with your own platform, whether it's an internal facing application within your enterprise organization, whether it's external facing and it's a revenue generating product in your SaaS application. You're able to take those analytics and embed them in there. And finally, we have data stories. We're talking about empowering business users with the ability to create LLM-powered stories using your data and that are shareable, editable, and that live and breathe the data from your business. So we're looking to combine all these capabilities into one platform. Number two, we're talking about a BI service that has AI capabilities deeply embedded within the application, whether it's simple forecasting, contribution analysis, anomaly detection, or we're talking about leveraging generative AI to increase your productivity, to help your authors be faster, to help your consumers, your dashboard consumers, find insights more quickly. We're working and we already have a platform that's full of these capabilities, and we're looking to continue expanding that over time. The third point I'm going to highlight, QuickSight is born in the cloud, and it's born with the purpose in life to auto scale, to provide high performance. Whether you have 10 users, 100 users, or 100,000 users, QuickSight will scale with your demand. And finally, pay-as-you-go pricing. We provide a highly valuable and economical pay-as-you-go pricing. You only pay for what you consume, and it's really powerful value add for the business. So back to the main attraction here, we're talking about data connectivity. We're talking about connecting to your data sources. So we understand that you have data, everyone has data that's going to live in different places. So we connect to that data. We're able to make that data performance ready. So that means that we either ingest it into what we call the Spice Engine. Spice Engine is a highly powerful cache database that allows you to do analytics over large amounts of data with large amounts of concurrent users. If as an alternative to Spice, we also support direct querying, where you, in that case, instead of pulling the data into our cache, you leverage your cloud data warehouse. You leverage that source data set and data source, and you let them do the work. Whichever method you choose, we're going to make that data analytics ready by letting you build data models on top of Spice or Direct Query. Once that data is ready, you go ahead and you create analysis. You leverage our machine learning insight capabilities. You massage the data with SageMaker. You build interactive dashboards, embedded applications, leverage our NanoQ or create pagina reports, and then you distribute these assets throughout the organization, whether it's as BI, whether it's as an embedded application, as data products. And all of this is under the umbrella of AWS services and in QuickSight in particular, auto scaling. It's highly available, it's governed, secure, it supports multi-tenancy. We have APIs for everything, and it's pay as you go. So this is what you get out of your data once you connect to it with QuickSight. And then, so what is the final product that we create? I'm assuming most of us are familiar, but just in case, in QuickSight we can create beautiful interactive, whether it's KP infographic looking dashboards, or your more traditional exploratory slice and dice dashboard. You can see we have all types of looks and feels that can be created in QuickSight. We also can create paginated report, embedded analytics. So here we have examples from our customers of dashboards that they've built and embedded and made available to their customers to gain data into the insights of the data that they provide. And finally, I talked about paginated reporting. So here we have some screenshots of what that looks like. We're talking, traditional multi-page PDF that gets sent out and distributed across the enterprise. All of these are the different outputs that you can create from QuickSight. So back to data connectivity. So at the end of the day, we all have our data. Our data is going to be stored in different locations. We have connectors that allow you access that data. So we can connect to your standard data sources that you would expect, whether it's flat files, whether it's connecting to databases in AWS, outside of AWS. We have a few dozen connectors available today out of the box, and we have more that are coming. Today, we're going to focus on 3 AWS services that provide access to data. One of them is S3, direct S3 connectivity. 2, we'll talk about Athena. And lastly, we'll talk about Redshift. Now, we're talking about connecting to these 3 data sources with a feature called run as role. So what exactly is run as role? It's something that it's not a common term. It's something that we've coined here as a way to connect the data. And let's take a step back here and looking at how we connect the data from QuickSight. There is a variety of approaches that we can use to authenticate and to authorize access to different users to your data. And this is just maybe some of them. I might even left some out here. But at a high level, we know, I want you all to understand that there is a QuickSight managed role that can be configured, or can be configured to bring your own role. This role is going to define which services and which data within these services AWS can access. We have other options in addition to this role. You can have scope down roles or policies that apply to specific users or specific groups. We can leverage lake formation for authorization into Athena data. Many databases use your traditional username and password. So it's a matter of the author just entering the username and password when they go to connect to that data source. We can use Secret Manager. We can use OAuth for certain web-powered data sources. And then we have that run as role as another alternative for authorization to these data sources. So what exactly is run as role? Run as role is what allows QuickSight administrators to provision data sources access to specific users based on IAM role defined permission. This approach is going to enhance data security, allowing for fine-grained access to be defined and shared within the QuickSight platform. So what exactly does that look like in QuickSight? It's as simple as this. So here we're looking at, I'm looking at a shared folder. Inside that folder, I have created, with this run as role feature, a data source. This data source is connecting to API. So what this allows me to do is to create a data source, put it in a folder, or share it with via permissions, and that data source is there, hard-coded and accessible to those users that I've granted access to, and that is going to use that role. That role will define what data that data source has access to. So that's what run as role is. It's another way of creating a data source with specific permissions. And there's a few ways to kind of deploy these data sources through the organization. The one way that I'm going to be demoing in this presentation today is using folders. So I'm going to be taking the APIs, I'm going to be creating a data source via the API, and I'm going to put it in a folder. This folder contains the permissions that this data source will inherit. So if I've shared my folder with certain users, the data source that I've created in that folder will be available to those users that have access to the folder. And this is one way to create these data sources. Another way to create it is to define specific permissions in the data source itself. So you're going to say, from the API creation perspective, I'm going to create a data source and I'm going to share it with X, Y, and Z users to have owner permissions or viewer permissions, however I choose to define those permissions. But again, I'm going to focus on this demonstration. I'm using folders to manage the permissions. Why? Because I think it's easier, it's simpler to manage permissions via folders. So as an example, I wanted to kind of paint a picture of how this can be used in an enterprise in the organization. So this is an example of an organization. In particular, we're looking at a marketing department. And we're using folders in this organization to organize assets and to manage permissions and to handle asset governance. The data provisioning in this organization and this fictitious organization can be either done with scripts or by hand by the admin, or it can be managed in a programmatic fashion by the data mesh itself that's deployed in the organization. We're going to use the runner's role data sources to allow data admins full flexibility and control to access S3, Athena, and Redshift. And how does it work? I have like 1, 2, and 3, and 4 steps here in this diagram. So first step is the administrator, whether it's a team admin or a system admin or the data mesh itself, is going to provision the folders, the permissions, and creating all the structure for the assets and for the marketing team in this case to work, to collaborate, and to share assets with the organization. In this marketing department folder, we're going to have these subfolders. So one of them could be data assets. And the data assets is where I'm going to be creating the data source. So that would be maybe step number 2, like create the data source. From there, you have analysts that are free to work on this data. So they can start by creating a data set. This data set can live in the same data assets or in a different folder. Then from this data set, analysts can go ahead and create different analysis. Ultimately, taking the analysis, publishing it to a dashboard, and by publishing to maybe the dashboard folder, that dashboard folder is going to define the readers who are going to be accessing that dashboard. So this structure, this setup here, is going to create a very governed, providing governed access to your data, yet freedom for the marketing department to connect to that data, create the data assets that they need, and share them with the users that they need to share it to. This is just one example. This is maybe the more structured enterprise example, but we have customers that are using folders, using data sources in many different ways, depending on the required use case. So now we're going to take a look at the 3 data sources that are possible, what the setup looks like, and then we'll do a quick demonstration for each one. So for all 3 of these data sources, we're going to find that the role that we configure to access the data is going to need this trust policy in place. This is an assume role to allow this role to assume QuickSight permissions. So this is a must for all 3 of these roles that we're going to be creating, providing access to the 3 data sources. So now specific to S3, there's a few things that need to be done in order to create this data source. So first, just like any S3 data source, we need to define a manifest. This manifest is a JSON file that includes and defines where does the data live and what format the data is in. In my demo, I have uploaded that manifest directly to S3. Step number 2 is that we're going to create a role. This role is going to include the assume role trust policy that we mentioned earlier, plus it's going to have these permission policies attached to it. In the case, in the demo that I created, and we have 3 individual permissions. First, we are allowing it to list the S3 buckets. 2, we're allowing it to get the manifest, to get object, to get the manifest itself. And 3, we're allowing it to get the files inside of that bucket. So once we create the policy with the permissions to access both the manifest and the data, we can create the data source itself. So I'm using by the way, all these examples are going to be shared with this PowerPoint presentation, and these are all taken directly from our documentation, these screenshots. So this is also all included in our documentation. So step 3 is I'm using the APIs, using that create data source API endpoint to create my S3, my S3 connectivity. In this scenario, I'm specifying the name of it and in data source parameters. I'm putting a role ARN, which is the role that I've created with the permissions, and then I'm specifying the bucket location with the bucket name and the manifest. Once you create the data source, this is what it's going to look like. I'm going to switch over to QuickSight, to AWS actually. So here we're at AWS, and I'm going to first give a sneak peek of what that permissions look like that I created. So I'm going to search for S3. I have a run as role S3 that I created. And we'll see, first of all, that it has that policy, the trust relationship that I mentioned, the assume role, that is a must. And then under the permissions, I've defined the 3 things that I highlighted a few minutes ago. First, we see the allow list buckets, the allow get object for the manifest, and the allow get object for the files themselves. I've gone ahead and used this policy name, created a data source in my restricted folder, and I'm going to show that to you right now. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm in QuickSight now. I'm going to navigate to my shared folders. You see here that I have my Teams folder and with my subfolders. In particular, I'm looking at that data sources subfolder. And I see here the 3 data sources that I've created, the first one being the S3. If I go ahead and I look at that data source, I'm going to note that it specifies a role ARN that I defined earlier. Now, if I want to use this data source, just like any other data source in QuickSight, I click it. I click Create Dataset, and I'm able to either edit my dataset and or visualize directly in an analysis, just like any other data source. So that's how it looks and feels and behaves when we're talking about S3. Excuse me. Now we're going to look at Athena. So Athena run as role is very similar to the S3. It's actually a little bit simpler, but it's simpler from one perspective because there's no need for a manifest to be included. But where it gets maybe a little more complicated is the policy itself needs to be specific to provide access to the Athena assets required, S3 and Athena querying, as well as in my scenario, I have lake formation in place. So I also need to grant access to this role in lake formation to run queries against the tables that I want to give access to. So those are the different steps on the setup. In my case, I have lake formation in place, so I got to make sure that the role that I create not only can access Athena, not only can they access S3, but they can also access via lake formation. And now with this role in place, just like S3, I go ahead and I create that data source. And taking a look in the console, taking a look at the policy, I'll go ahead and I'll look for that role that I've created for Athena. Again, we have that trust relationship in place. That is a must. And then for this one, I did not give it fine-grained permissions. I guess you can say I took a shortcut for the purpose of the demo, and I gave him Athena full access and S3 full access. But in reality here, you could scope down and hone down to just what it needs to run queries in Athena and the buckets in S3. We can also take a quick look at lake formation, where I've granted access to that role. So if I go search lake formation, I'll go and look at my table, which is called SAS data in my scenario. And if I look at the grants, I'll see that I've granted that role, which is called a run as role rar demo role for Athena, access to the table, to the column, and to the database. So this role is provisioned fully to query the data. Now let's go back to QuickSight, go back to my shared folder. I have now here this data source that I've created, Athena with custom permissions. And as expected, I'm able to, I can look at the role being used. I see here it's using that RAR demo role for Athena. I'm able to take this data source, create data set. You'll notice here that it's going to see the databases that have been provisioned via lake formation. In my case, I have that RAR demo. I see that table that I provisioned, and I'm able to quickly begin creating an analysis. So with restricted folders, one of the interesting features, and I wanna specify something here. I'm using restricted folders for the folders. I'm also using subfolders in the restricted folders. This feature is currently in preview. It will be out later this year. So if interested in exploring their preview, please let me know. Or let us know, let your TAM know, let your account manager know, they'll know how to reach me, and then we can enable this preview for you. When creating assets in restricted folders with subfolders, one interesting thing is that you have to define where that asset will be created. So here I'm creating a data set and analysis, and I want to put this data set and analysis in my root folder. So I'm going to go ahead and specify where I want these assets created, and I'll click add. And then it'll go through the process, open up the analysis design UI, and here I'm able to create visualizations. Notice how it's ingesting the data right now. So while it's ingesting, it won't show anything, but once it's done ingesting, it'll show me the charts. I'm able now to publish this analysis into maybe a different folder with different permissions if I wanted to. So that's the Athena connectivity. We looked at the lake formation permissions, we looked at the role, and then we looked at the data directly in QuickSight. Okay, very good. Now we have one more data source to explore, and that's going to be Redshift. So Redshift is in a similar sense. The first step is to create that policy based on a Redshift that Redshift has a few other security requirements that need to be configured before connecting to it, whether it's the security groups and networking access to Redshift that needs to be in place. Obviously, the Redshift in this, as of today, we're going to be using a username and the get cluster credentials API call to get the password in a programmatic fashion and provision access to Redshift. This will change in the future, and I'll show that in a few minutes. So the first step is we create this policy. This policy has first the basic describe Redshift access required, and it also includes this policy for the Redshift get cluster credentials. That's going to allow the service to get the credentials for the user defined. Then we're going to go ahead and we're going to create that data source, again using the CLI. Now here we have a few more parameters to define in order to access Redshift. So we're going to include as Redshift parameters our database name, a host, the port, of course, the cluster ID. But the things that are unique here is the role ARN. So this is that role that we've defined that has access to Redshift and the generate credentials API. Then we're specifying what user we're going to be using. And then we're going to set to true to the auto create database user parameter. In addition, we're specifying VPC connection. So and in my data source, I'm going to define what VPC will be used. In the future, if you note here, we're specifying a database user. In the future, we're going to release a capability. I believe it's coming out in the next in the first half of 2024. We're going to have the ability of, instead of using a user, define everything at the policy level, which means that we'll be able to remove the policy that I showed here for the get cluster credentials. We're able to remove the database user for here, and instead we're able to define in Redshift itself the IAM role permissions that are granted. So we can specify what tables and what views that role is able to query. So how does this look like in the application? So if I go ahead and I switch over to my browser, so first we'll look at the IAM roles. and I'll look at the role I created for Redshift. And we'll see that we have again that trust policy for assume role and QuickSight. And I have some permissions. Again, I took a little bit of a shortcut here as I was in a rush to build the demo and I gave Redshift full access, but we're able to scope that down to a describe. And then more importantly, you have that get cluster credentials policy here. I've gone ahead and I created my data source already. So I'm going to access in my teams folder, in my data sources folder. I have here my Redshift run as role. We're going to see that that role is using this role that this data source is using the role that I've created. And we can go ahead and show how we can connect with it, create data set. Got to make sure that my cluster is running. It is good. I have here the schema that I have access to. I see here the different tables, and I'm seeing some data. So that's the content I had in place. I know it was a lot of information condensed. Like mentioned, the slides will be available, as well as all this information is in our documentation and accessible